Tonight we are going to be in our third lesson, which is going to be looking at the end of Esther chapter 2, and then going into Ezra. I'm going to be saying that a lot tonight. Esther chapter 3 as well. Okay? So it's been a little bit since we've had Bible study. Anybody got any questions or comments over the last two lessons? No? Okay, well, just as a very quick recap, you remember in chapter 1, we had Queen Vashti, who was a Persian queen, deposed because she was not willing to come at the king's command and display her beauty at his bragging banquet. And so from there, they decided that they were going to have do a search to find somebody better than she was. And so that search was all over the Persian Empire, bringing beautiful young girls to the king, and then he got to take his pick who was going to be his queen. Remember that all those that were there were in the harem, and so it wasn't like they could go home. But Esther was selected to be queen. Now, what we see tonight in the last of chapter 2 and also going into all of chapter 3 is we're kind of looking at plots. We're starting to see a plot that is uncovered, and we see a plot that is formed as well, which is going to kind of set the events in motion, for the rest of the book. And so, looking at chapter 2 and verse number 19, we see this plot that Mordecai uncovers. In verse number 19, it says, "When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do so, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up." I keep on forgetting these until I start to read, and then I realize, oh, I need these. So, unfortunately, I think that it's going to be a ever-increasing permanent thing. Don't think it's going back the other way. Okay, so what we see in chapter 19, and by the way, where it says the virgins were assembled a second time, it's kind of a question of, well, who were these virgins and what were they doing being assembled a second time? There are some people that's going to think that this is going to be another time where King Xerxes goes and gathers up a bunch of other virgins to bring into his harem. And that very well may be. I mean, Solomon had, 800 and something, 700 and something in his harem, concubines in his harem. And so, it could very well be that, there's a lot of women that are going to be in this. But I kind of think where it says, when the virgins were assembled a second time, the virgins, even though they're not really virgins, I think that these were the virgins that they gathered up. And I think that, this is that group that is appearing the second time. They're assembling a second time. Why is that? I don't know. I don't know if that is in any relationship to Esther being selected as queen. I don't know if it's anything to do with this banquet that he threw. I don't know. I don't really think that is really all that important. What is important is at that time that the virgins were selected the second time, this is where things get interesting. Notice that if we continue in verse number 20, that Esther is keeping secret her family background and nationality as Mordecai has told her to do. Mordecai said, you keep quiet that you're a Jew. And so she was doing that. And did you notice that she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up? And so, Esther's beauty was more than skin deep too. She was a good girl, and followed her uncle / stepfather's instructions there. Okay, now getting into verse number 21 is where things get interesting. It says, during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. And so Bigthana, man, there's another good name. Can't you see that? I can just think, Bigthana. Hey, Bigthana, how you doing? And it's a little bitty guy. Hey, I'm okay. I can just see it. That's why he's called Bigthana, is because he's a little bitty guy. No, that has nothing to do with it. But these two men, Bigthana and Teresh, these are two of the king's officers. And I don't know why they became angry. I don't know if it has anything to do with the assembling of the virgins the second time, or it's just simply this is what's going on. But as they are there and starting to conspire to assassinate King Xerxes, notice that Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate, just like he was doing earlier when these virgins were assembled. So what does this tell you about Mordecai? He's what? He's listening, but it also is showing that he's got access to the Persian government in order to be sitting in that spot. And so he's not just simply, off there in the distance somewhere, because if you're going to be sitting in the king's gate, it means that you're going to be kind of close into the king. And so if you're kind of close to the king, he's not within the inner circle where Xerxes would know who he is what we're going to find out. But at the same time, he is going to be there in this sphere of influence. And so
Mordecai was an older cousin of Esther?
Yes, older cousin.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and he raised her.
Yeah, like
Yeah. Did I say uncle? Cousin, yeah.
I think it's older cousin. Yeah,
you're right. But he raised her as his own.
Right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, these two men, Bigthana and Teresh, because they became angry, they started to have this conspiracy to assassinate the king. And what we see, verse number 22, it says, but Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And so Mordecai hears about it. Somehow he's able to get word to Esther about what's going on. Esther then somehow is able to get word to the king. As word is gotten to the king, then all of a sudden they start to investigate it. They start to find out what's going on. Verse 22, when the report is investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on a gallows. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. And so credit was given Mordecai. Mordecai, it was right there, written in the book. By the way, where it says that these two men were hanged on the gallows, we oftentimes think when we think hanged on the gallows that, it's by the neck. The Persians didn't do that. The way that they hung people was they went and they took them and put them on a sharp stick and impaled them, allowed them to hang there. And so that's probably the method of execution, because that's what they were known to do.
That's
okay?
Pleasant.
What's that?
I said that's pleasant.
Yeah, that is pleasant. That's actually kind of where the Romans kind of got their idea of crucifixion, only they amplified it.
Oh, Romans were
more.
professional executors.
Yes, they were. Okay, so here's Mordecai. Does Mordecai really get what is due him? What's owed to him? I don't even know if he gets a thumbs up. I mean, it's recorded in the book. Okay? I mean, he's credited for it. Esther's there. It says Mordecai does it. And he's credited because his recording into the book, it's there. So it's not like people are, no, we don't want anything to do with Mordecai. Let's shove this under the rug. It's just that, Mordecai does this, and it's just like everybody goes about their business. Mordecai's just kind of forgotten about, so to speak, right? So here's a question to you, and that is, are there times in our life where we really don't get what's due us? I mean, I think it's quite a natural thing that we sometimes do stuff and people really don't recognize it, and we really don't get the credit that we really deserve, right?
But I wrote right next to verse 22, I said, God, I just jotted down, God is setting up Mordecai's credibility and loyalty to the king.
That's where I'm going with this. And that is, even when we're put in those kind of situations, does God know about it? He does. Yeah. And so I'm not saying that God knows about it and then all of a sudden we're going to be credited and we're going to be rewarded and get what is owed us in this life. It may not be that way at all. You know, this life is full of injustice because this life is full of unjust people, right? But when you look at the bigger picture, God has a plan and God has a purpose. And it is necessary for that plan and purpose for Mordecai to be overlooked at this point in time, as we are going to find out later in the story. As a matter of fact, the remainder of the story probably isn't going to go the way that we read it if Mordecai is recognized at this point in time. Okay? And so just because we don't get recognized, it doesn't mean that God doesn't know, number one, and it also doesn't mean that God doesn't have a plan and a purpose, and it could be. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is, but it could be that being overlooked and not being recognized is part of God's will and plan for our life. I mean, after all, when you take a look at the Beatitudes, how many of those Beatitudes are people who are getting recognized for what they do right here and now? Blessed are the who? The meek. Blessed are the peacemakers, but blessed are the meek.
Yeah.
Why are the meek blessed?
They shall inherit the kingdom of God. I don't know.
I was thinking
No.
because they're not doing it for the glory for them. They're
Right.
doing it because that's either for the glory of God or
Yeah.
what needs to be done.
Now wait a minute. Now I got to take a look at it.
I'm so bad at the Beatitudes.
What's that?
I am really not good at the Beatitudes. I always get them wrong.
Well, actually, I thought I was pretty good at the Beatitudes, and now all of a sudden, it's one of those blanks. And so, let's see. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Okay? And so when you look at blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted because of the kingdom, you can see that these people are not the ones that are getting theirs right here now in this earth, on this earth, but rather there's later on a reward if we do things for the Lord. Okay? All right. So there is the plot. There is the plot that is uncovered. Now let's take a look at chapter 3, and we see a plot that is formed. So it says in chapter 3 and verse number 1, after these events. Now, we need to understand that this is actually a long time after these events, okay? I'll explain why. When you take a look at verse number 7, okay? In verse number 7, we have a time stamp there in the 12th year of King Xerxes in the first month, okay? Now, let's go back, and if you remember when chapter 3, verse number 7, in chapter 2 and in verse number 16, It says, she was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence on the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Okay? So 12 minus 7 is what? 5. Of course, we've got, months that are in there, so we're really talking about 4 years and so many months here. But, we're talking about a long period of time transpires between chapter 2 and chapter 3. So where it says, after these events, let's not be thinking about it like, oh yeah, this happens on, week 1 and week number 3. No, this is happening on year number 5 or year number 7, and then in year number 12, these other events take place. Okay, so after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than all of the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But who's at the king's gate still? All of these years later, Mordecai. Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Why? Why in the world is this taking place? I think it has to do with this man is an Agagite. All right? I don't think it has anything to do with Mordecai as a Jew, and so therefore he's not going to bow down to other people. I don't know that there's anything about that in the law to do that. In the Bible, in the book of Romans, we're taught that we're supposed to honor those whose honor is due. And so, if the president walks in here, and whether you like him or not, whether you voted for him or not, as Christians, we should say, Mr. President. We should not bow before him because he's not a king. And, I'm not going to bow down to somebody who says that they're a king of the United States because, hey, our Constitution doesn't have us have a king, right? Okay. But back in Persia, you've got the king. You got the king giving this command. I want you to honor this man, bow down before him. And so everybody is, Mordecai is not. And so there is something about this man, Haman, that is keeping him from bowing down. And the only thing that is mentioned in this scripture here about why he doesn't bow down is the fact that he is the Agagite. And so who are the Agagites? Well, it could be, and I'm not saying that this is the absolute truth, but it makes sense, that an Agagite refers back to King Agag, A-G-A-G, okay? Way back in the Old Testament, when the Israelites were coming out, Agag was the king of the Amalekites. He opposed Israel, and Israel came and defeated him. And then the Amalekites were people that Israel constantly had problems with down throughout the centuries from that. And so it could be that this man Haman, son of Hammedatha, by being an Agagite, he could have been descended from Agag, or A-G-A-G, or it could be that maybe the reference is just simply he is opposed to Israel like Agag was too, okay? But whatever the case is, that's the reason why Mordecai is not bowing before him and giving him respect. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. So what happens as we continue to take a look at verses 3 and 4 is this. The royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Good question, right? All right. Day after day, they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. And so it's not as if that Haman is walking by and everybody else bows down and here's Mordecai. And Haman looks at him and, it's not that at all. I don't know, if everybody was doing it, maybe Mordecai is just, making himself scarce or whatever. But Haman doesn't realize it. Haman doesn't see it, but everybody else does. And so that's why they're going up to Mordecai and saying, why aren't you doing this? And so we don't have the answer of why he's not doing this, but they tell him day after day after day. So there's time is passing where Mordecai is not doing this and he's not refusing to comply. And so therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he told them that he was a Jew. So the only reason why we know that Mordecai's not doing it is just simply he's a Jew, right? And so they go to Haman, they tell him about this, and what we see in verse number 5 is this. It says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. And so what we're talking about here is genocide. We're talking about Hitler. We're talking about the Holocaust of what Haman is really wanting to do. Now, just stop and think about this for a second. If his hatred and anger was just simply towards Mordecai, it will be one thing. But why is it that all of a sudden he took this hatred that he had directed to Mordecai and then transferred it to all the Jews everywhere?
There has to be hatred that was already there in my mind. He has,
To the Jews?
yeah,
I think so.
he has an axe to grind.
Okay.
And this is a catalyst.
Okay. Why is it that there was so much hatred towards the Jews? And why is it that there's always been hatred for the Jews? I mean, right now in the world, what do you see? Hatred for the Jews. Why is it that the people in Iran hate Israel so much? I can kind of understand Hamas hating the Jews because of the back and forth wars and everything, and what they've been told about the Jews stealing their land, everything like that. But at the same time, just all across that, and then, you got people all over the world in different pockets and places that are just simply anti-Israel, anti-Jews. We hate Jews. Why? Well, they're bad people. Well, why? Well, we don't know. You go back to World War II, you find the same thing, right? Pre-World War II, you find the same thing. You go back into the Middle Ages, before that, it's just, there has always been this hatred towards the Jews. And so, why is that?
Because they're God's people living in Satan's world.
There we go. Okay? God's chosen people living in Satan's world. Yeah. And so there is a spiritual dimension towards all of this. And this is, when we look at end time events, this is the reason why the Antichrist and Satan, the dragon, are going to be so bent on exterminating all the Jews because of this spiritual dimension that is there. Okay? All right. So, continuing on, what we see in verse number 7 is this plot is starting to take place. Okay? We've got the hatred that's there. But in verse number 7 it says, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, they cast the pure, that is, the lot, in the presence of Haman, to select a day and a month, and the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Okay, so pure means lot. Have you heard of Purim? Okay, Purim is a Jewish feast, and it is a Jewish feast based on this book of Esther. And the reason why it's called Purim is because you add the I and the M on it, then that makes lot or pure, plural. And so it's not just lot, but it's lots. And so there's the Purim that is there. Okay? So now you know where that's coming from. All right. So what we see is that in verse number 8, it says, then Haman said to King Xerxes, by the way, why did they cast the lot? Why did they do that, do you think? Think back to ancient times. Why would people have cast lots in ancient times? To discern the will of God. Okay? And so basically, we want God to grant success to this. And so, of course, Haman is not worshiping the God of the Jews, obviously. But I'm sure that he's worshiping his own gods. And so he's casting the lot to try to, find out from his God when the best time to do all of this is. Okay? So when you look at that, it's kind of like, okay, he's really involving God in his decision right here, but involving God in his decision in a very wrong way. Right? When we take a look at life today, there's going to be people who involve God, but if you're not going to involve the true and the living God, and if you're not going to involve God in truth, then you're going to be involving God in the wrong way. And when you involve God in the wrong way, then you shouldn't expect anything good to come out of it. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we see is that in verse number 8, Haman goes and he starts to enact his plot by going and involving the king. So what we see is in verse number 8, it says, then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of other peoples, and do not obey the king's laws. It is the king's best interest to tolerate them. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. Now let me ask you a question. The certain people that he's talking about, who are we talking about? We're talking about the Jews, right? Why doesn't Haman say, hey, it's the Jews?
He's trying to be, what is it today?
Sly dog.
Yeah.
Do you think that if he came right out and said, it's the Jews, do you think that the king might have had the same response? Maybe not, because if you talk about a certain people, do you know who those people are? No. But if you say it's the Jews or it's these people or that people, then you have an idea about who those people are, right? But if you just simply say a certain people, you don't know who those certain people are. And so you are left with taking what the person gives you about the certain people, right?
And so King Xerxes may not have had any vendetta against the Jews.
Right.
But like what you're saying, if Haman says there's this people and this is what they're doing, it's like it could be a rebel group. It could be I can't think of any of the words that I want to say.
Scoundrels, misfits. It could be a small group, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we may be talking about, a very small group. Are the Jews a small group or a large group? They're a large group, and they're scattered all throughout the kingdom. Okay? But this is what he says here. He says that the Jews, their customs are different from the customs of other people. Is that true? Yeah, it should be. As far as Christian people, don't we need to be different than the world? Yeah, we should be. But you notice the last part of that, who do not obey the king's laws. Now, were the Jews doing that? think back to what we looked at in the study of Ezra and the study of Nehemiah. What were the Jews doing? Were they disobeying the king's laws? No, but if you remember, at pretty much this time period, this is in between the time period of Zerubbabel and Ezra. And so if you remember, they had started the work on the temple and they had stopped because of what? That threat from the people in writing letters to the Persian king. Different Persian king, but still a Persian king who then says, stop building it. All right? So did they continue to build it? No, they stopped. Okay. Until they started to come back again, right? All right. So you kind of see a little bit of the sneakiness here. You see a little bit of the deception. And just keep in mind what Satan does with us. And that is that he oftentimes doesn't tell us the whole truth about things because that's not going to work in deception's favor. He's going to put a little bit of truth in something to make it seem real, but the real crux of the issue he's going to keep false. So he comes on down to say in verse number 9, if it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this business. By the way, do you know how much, where it says here, let's see, what was the amount again? 10,000 talents of silver. Do you know how much tonnage of silver that is?
No.
It's about 375 tons.
Oh, my goodness.
Tons.
Tons.
Wow.
Yeah, 375 tons. It's kind of like, did Haman really have that much silver in his possession?
That's a lot to store.
That's a lot to store. So that is kind of what makes some people say, well, maybe he wasn't really talking about that because the annual income of the Persian Empire was 15,000 talents of silver. And so, if we're talking about, let's see, what do you say? 10,000 talents of silver and the GDP is 15,000 talents of silver. It's probably not, What he's probably talking about is he's saying, if we do this, we can take 15,000 talents of silver and we can put it into the royal treasury. At least that's what some people say. Yeah, not out of his personal wallet, but we can be putting this and paying the men from the royal treasury of the men who carry out this business. So the king took out a signet ring from his finger, verse number 10, gave it to Haman, the son of Haman, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. So what we see in verse number 12 is that in the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and each language of each people all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Who had the ring? Haman did. So here we've got an ancient form of the auto pen. Right? Okay. Hey, here's my ring. Go ahead and do what you want, Haman. Okay, let's go do it. What's that?
That was such a bad idea.
Such a bad idea. Such a bad idea. So what we see is that this plot continues to be enacted. Since he goes and he takes all of these documents that are written to all of these different places, all throughout the Persian Empire, all sealed, signed, not with King Xerxes' signature, but with his name, and then sealed with the ring. Then in verse number 13, we see dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Okay, so remember when he cast the lot? What month was that?
12th month.
Okay, it was the first month.
Oh.
It was the 12th year, but it was the first month. Okay? And
Oh, when he cast the, like,
right.
At what time did he cast the lot?
Yeah, and so what time did the lot say?
12th month.
The 12th month. So we've got a year span here, right? Okay. And so that is enough time to go convince King Xerxes to do this, and then to go and make all these, documents and decrees, and then to get dispatches and send them all out the kingdom, to say, on this day, what's going to happen is it is not just simply you can do this, but on this day, everyone has orders to do this, to destroy, kill, annihilate all the Jews, young, old, women, children. On a single day, Haman wants everybody wiped out. Now that's bad, isn't it? It is. And so, verse number 14 says, a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so they would be ready for that day. Now, notice number 15. Verse number 15 is interesting. Spurred on by the king's command, the couriers went out, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was what? Bewildered. Okay? So, do you see the king and Haman's reactions to this decree versus the people? What's different?
Different narratives.
Different narratives. The king and Haman, what are they doing?
Drinking.
They're celebrating, right? Okay. Why is Haman celebrating?
Because he got his way.
His way.
Because he's getting his revenge, right? Why is the king celebrating?
He thinks he's just squelched a uprising.
A revolt, right?
So that's what I was wondering. Does he realize what this edict says?
Doesn't really seem like it, does it?
No.
He's just leaving it in Haman's hands.
Yeah.
And Haman's coming back, and what's Haman telling him? Haman's telling him what's going to keep the deception going. Oh, everything's going great, king. I've got all these documents signed, sealed, and they're being delivered to all providence. On a single day, what's going to happen is all of these enemies of yours, all these people who don't respect your laws, the orders are that all of these people are going to be destroyed in one single day, wiped out, and you won't have to be worried about it. King, let's drink.
I mean, would this have been all the Jews in the world at that time?
In the Persian Empire, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Which is almost all.
Yeah, which is pretty much all the Jews.
So it
Because
would have been pretty much.
I guess we don't know how many are scattered, but it's basically the nation is there.
I mean, in all the places that the Jews were scattered is where the Persian Empire is. I mean, they went down to Egypt. The Persians went down to Egypt. They went up to Asia Minor. Persians are in Asia Minor. I don't know if any Jews went over to Greece or not, but there weren't any Persians in Greece. But everywhere else, it really is genocide. Okay, but anyway, so there's the king and Haman. But what are the people doing? And I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm just talking about the everyday average citizens in Susa. Why are they confused?
Jews are just there. They're not doing anything.
But you have to wonder if they're going to do that to them. Are we going to be next?
Okay, there's the next thing. Because after all, it's kind of like, why are we doing this to the Jews? I mean, the Jews, they're just,
I think
it's
it's important to note that this edict didn't say all the Jews are going to be gathered up and killed on this day. The edict says everybody is going to kill the Jews on this day.
Yes.
Like it's neighbor against neighbor.
Yes.
Oh, I gotcha.
It's like you are taking up arms and you're killing your next door neighbor because he's a Jew.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. And it's not even you can do this. It is an order that you do this. And so if you don't do this, then what's the implication of that? You'd be killed too. Now, do you see why? Yeah, it is terrifying. It really is. And now you see why the people in Susa, they're like, you think that some might have been looking and going, wait a minute, is this right?
I
Did I read
what?
this right? What's that?
Like I do what?
Yeah.
Reading it.
So,
You want me to what?
they're probably, digesting this, and they're just like, this doesn't make any sense. Why in the world would we do this? And if there's any, it doesn't say what these orders said, but if there's anything in there about, people who are lawbreakers, and it would have been, well, wait a minute, I don't know that they're like that.
Yeah, I can't help but think like, your next door neighbor's a Jew and does his work, he keeps to himself, he's friendly, like your buds, and now you have to go kill him or be killed.
Right.
I don't like this.
Terrible, isn't it?
It's very uncomfortable.
Do you see the result of deception here? Especially when you look at the king who's thinking, oh yeah, this is a great thing. And look at the people and they're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Right? And, you look at deception today and you see that some people who are being deceived, they're like, oh, this is great, this is wonderful. But yet the people who are not the subjects of deception, they're like, why is this so great? Right? And so, one lesson for us to take from it is, we need to watch out where we're getting our, not to go back and preach a church camp sermon anymore, but we need to watch out for our influence in life perspectives. That was my church camp sermon, in case you forgot that.
What was there was a proverb that we read whenever we were studying Abigail, and it was like the fool's argument seems right until it's cross-examined.
Okay.
I've lost how that connected to what you said, but in my brain it did.
Well, no, it does make sense that, to the fool, this is right, this is great, this is wonderful, and then all of a sudden until people look at it from an objective point of view, and they're like, no, it doesn't.
Yes, like people get stuck in the way that they've heard and the way that they think is right and don't account for this perspective, like the outside perspective.
Yeah.
Or others' perspective.
Yeah.
And then you have to kill your neighbor.
All right, that's all I got. You have comments and questions about it?
I don't think I ever realized that it was, the citizens were going to have to kill the people. I assumed it was soldiers going out to kill them.
Yeah. I imagine that there were quite a few citizens that were just like, well, I don't know any Jews.
Yeah.
And there was probably several citizens, well, I don't know any Jews.
Well, I was out of town that day.
I went to go visit my aunt. She doesn't live near any Jews.
Gosh, what if, the terror of being a Jew and hearing that, it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I get away? I have however many days until this happens.
All right, we're going to leave it at that, because we're going to get into chapter 4 and we're going to see Mordecai's reaction.
I'm sure it's very well thought out. Mine would not be.
Keep in mind, Mordecai may have been thinking, it's all my fault. Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments? Well, let's pray. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for all of your many blessings. And Lord, thank you for allowing us to live in a free country where we can worship you and we can serve you without the threat of violence. And we ask that you please be with our country, be with our leaders. Please give them wisdom so that our freedoms can remain intact, so that we can go about our business of continuing to worship you freely and openly. And Lord, please allow us to do this during this time when we have this opportunity with gladness and rejoice in this freedom. Lord, please forgive us of our sins, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.